and everyone, welcome back to the latest episode of The Adventures of the Monk and the Monarch, with me, the Monarch, and my co-host, Mildra the Monk. You may notice, in this opening, you won't hear Mildra, because there was a mistake in the original live stream, where I had been playing the audio for my new AFK music, and I forgot to turn it off when the stream actually started. Conveniently, not much was actually missed in that recording. Effectively, we just kind of talked a bit about how in the early days of the Super Nintendo, there were a lot more restrictions in terms of translations and localizations. So while the topic is on the do's and don'ts of localization, we were a little more forgiving because of restrictions back in the early days of translations. I was of the opinion people like Ted Woosley probably got a bit too much shit online. Other than that, that's all that was really relevant during the initial bit of the recording. Everything after this will be the stream as intended.
It's far more important to get as close as possible. I wish Diamond Sutra's old blog was still active. There was one set of images that he had shown when it came to translating Tenra Bancho Zero, which I do want to run again in the future. It's just I need to find the right opportunity. He had said that he had to strike a balance between translating it and having it somehow fit so that the text didn't overlap the images. He had to go with what is the attempt, what's being said in this particular text, and how close can I get it while not using too many words. That's the thing. Good translators have to be writers in of themselves, but there's the understanding that they are essentially a steward of the experience. Nobody wants to read written by Ted Woosley. They'd want to read written by Kazushige Nojima or Motomu Toriyama. I know Toriyama gets some shit, but I'm just using those as examples. In the same vein, speaking of Ted Woosley, there is one change that he did with FF6 that I actually thought was smart. I'll go with two. One of them is Bart's in FF5. If you read the original, it's written as Butts, which became something of an in-joke when Anthology came out. But there was also the fact that Terra, who is ostensibly the protagonist of FF6, though I'm not entirely sure if I agree there.
I would say FF6 kind of doesn't have a singular protagonist, is the best way to describe it.
She's the cover girl, I'll put it that way. But originally her name was Tina, is a bit standard, but Terra in Greek means monster, which I'd say is a little bit more fitting given the story.
And I will say, specifically with the name Tina, that isn't a typical Japanese name. Like, it sounds out of the ordinary. So when you translate that directly, that feeling gets lost when you keep that name.
Yeah.
So it was a change that kept the original.
I will say it's a much better transition than Butts, spelled B-U-T-Z. When we talked about Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, the better of the two D movies, one of the things we had brought up is how Damphir became Dunpeel. I don't really fault the translator in that case because you're hearing a English version of a European word, and then you have to translate that into English.
Yeah, see, I think at this point it's obvious we're not coming down on things that are just straight up mistakes. Shit's gonna happen. Like, I think a pretty famous recent one that's just kind of a bit of a mistake that people largely forgave Elden Ring for was the Age of Stars ending.
Yeah.
There was an awkward, they basically just mixed up the syntax a little bit that made it sound like they were taking this entire world into a void of the stars and cold, when it's really just you, Ranni, and the Elden Ring that are getting taken out of the direct picture. I think people pretty much just forgave that because that was just a simple grammatical error, basically.
That, and consider how text in total you have to deal with in a game of that size.
Yes. The issue comes in when it's not just a simple mistake, like it's actual intent to change stuff, is when we start to have problems.
One thing that I think is important to note is a lot of the changes that are made to abide by some sort of current events thing. And this could be as innocuous as trying to put a modern-day meme in, or putting in some sort of hot-button issue at the time. The problem is that those things don't age for the same reason that a Seltzer and Friedberg movie doesn't age. It doesn't hold up with age, I should say. I know some might say, what, do you hate internet memes showing up in television? Yes, because given how long it takes to produce an episode, and that's just an episode stateside, by the time everybody sees the episode, that particular meme is outdated.
It's easy to forget sometimes how quickly memes come and go nowadays. You can have one start and end within a 24-hour period.
Now there's some cases of memes within certain fan bases that are going to stick around, like the whole Spoony Bard thing became such a meme that it's become canon.
Yeah. When it hits that point, if it fits, I wouldn't mind it showing up somewhere, but
Uh,
it's never those memes that we have the issue with.
no, it's the kind of it's the equivalent of of putting in jokes about selfies. Okay, maybe not the best example because people still take selfies, but
But it's kind of died out as a joke for the most part, except for specific uses.
you know who's one studio who I think got a lot more shit than they deserved
Which
when it
one?
came to this sort of thing? Working Designs. I don't want to go too much into detail because I do want to save Working Designs for their own focus down the road. But they admitted that there's plenty of times where something that makes sense in Japanese doesn't quite land in English.
I don't remember what the anime was called, but essentially you have this weird bit where someone shows up with a mattress and just smacks someone in the face with it. And you're like, this is out of nowhere. The gag is supposed to be, slapping someone with a gauntlet is to issue a challenge, but the kanji for mattress and gauntlet are near identical. So the person just got it wrong. What they did in the English adaptation is like when you didn't see any of their mouths off screen, one of them was explaining the joke. It's the quickest way to kill a joke, but
Yeah, normally I would hate that, but this is a no-win situation.
there's no way
Um,
to have it come across as intended without, again, explaining the joke. So do you do that,
when
or do you come up with a different gag that kind of sort of makes sense?
when Zetsubo Sensei came out, as far as I'm aware, they didn't even try to dub it. And it's understandable because, as I've mentioned in the past, every single character's name is some form of in joke in Japanese.
Oh yeah, I remember a while ago we tried to do that whole long ass name on one of the streams.
Oh yeah, that one. That obviously is a nod to the whole
Yeah.
thing. That's a Rakugo poems are a meme meme in of themselves. Of course, the joke with Jugemu is when the parent asked the monk to give their kid a Buddhist name, the monk gave a bunch of them. The father couldn't figure out which ones, so he said, "Give him all of them." And several of the names are in jokes in and of themselves.
Now, see, we're saying a lot of things that you might hear from people who are like all against everyone arguing for better translations. The thing is, while all of these things are true, we have a lot of companies and localizers out there using them as an excuse to not try.
Yes. I've always said how worthwhile is your argument when you have to rely on verbal tricks? Like if you have to rely on verbal tricks and gotchas, I don't think your argument is worth hearing. A while back, I ended up going down a rabbit hole of seeing the difficulties of translating German into Eng for adapting the works of Kafka. Because with a lot of German, if you translate that straight into English, even if German is one of the languages that composes modern English, you have to deal with the fact that a lot of the sentence structure would create a bunch of run-on sentences. The big reason I'm pointing these kind of things out is it's very easy to paint translation or localization with a broad brush. I have seen people who are heavily critical of bad localization doing that, as if the entire concept of localization is one without merit because of bad actors. It's easy to fall into that narrative of just doing a black and white approach, but the problem is adapting things from one language to another is not a black and white affair. It's just that bad actors are aware of the fact that it isn't a black and white affair and intentionally obfuscate. If you want to see a recent example of understanding what to do and what not to do with localization, Zan has brought up your boy Kongming, which I think one of the translators for that went into the fact that it was really hard to translate the raps into something that would still be equivalent but still rhyme, which is spinning two plates at once.
I stand rap has to be one of the hardest things to try to translate from one language to another because you have to keep it in rhythm, you have to keep the intent, and you have to make it all rhyme while taking into account all of the wordplay, which has to be a nightmare to translate from Japanese.
Mm.
That is no easy feat.
Speaking of things that they didn't try and dub, I think Gintama also was a case of they didn't even try to dub it. And I do remember reading the Del Rey version of I think it was Zetsubo Sensei and a few others where they would have these appendixes at the back of the volume to go into certain in jokes or certain references. That also happened with Tsubasa Chronicle. And again, normally that wouldn't fly with me. In the case of say Tsubasa Chronicle, a lot of it is Clamp making in jokes and references to their old work. So it's somewhat understandable. I only saw like the first few episodes of the anime version. I'm more familiar with the manga, which had those little additional notes, especially regarding characters who you'd think would be throwaways but are actually inside references. Because well, Clamp has done a lot of shit.
I wouldn't actually mind seeing a return of the editor's note you'd see in certain fan translations. Don't get me wrong, some of them back in the day got really stupid. Specifically, I think a lot of us will remember the one from one of the Death Note fan subs where it says all according to Kaiku, and then at the top it says translator's note, Kaiku means plan. Maybe not dumb shit like that, but at the same time, I think some well done editor's notes would not be a bad idea.
Not to bring up Gintama again, but I remember for one episode there were so many editor's notes that instead of putting the editor's notes during the episode, they're like, screw it, there's too many to do during the episode, so we're just gonna do a add-on for like 2 minutes after the episode that goes into all of them. It was a clip show that doubled as a shit post, although saying Gintama and shit post in the same sentence is kind of redundant. I also remember with Martian's successor Nadesco, there were a few cases of that. In the character profile extras on the DVD, it had to explain why Gai Daigoji would insist on that name instead of his birth name, Jiro Yamada. Jiro Yamada is the Japanese equivalent of being named John Smith. There's the running gag where he keeps correcting people when they use his actual name instead of the name he wants to be used. In a lot of cases, there are some aspects that could be forgiven because of the fact that the character limits were a bit of an issue with the equipment at the time. Like we've talked about this before, the fact that you can say more in Japanese characters in less amount of space than you can in a in the standard alphabet.
And while I'll say that's probably more of an issue for like those older games and whatnot, it doesn't completely eliminate that issue translating into English normally.
It's not nearly as much of an issue now.
It's one reason I'm a lot more forgiving of those older days.
Especially since with some of them, I know that I know for a fact that they didn't have a whole lot to work with. As I've mentioned on multiple occasions, you play the hand that you're dealt.
Now, one thing that does seem a little contentious, depending on who you ask, is one thing like Japanese has that we don't are your honorifics, at least not to the same degree. So there's also the question like, how do you handle translating that into English? Do you just include the sans, samas, and all that? Because you can't just do like Mr. on all of them because it's not how it works.
I'd say a trickier thing is when you're dealing with characters who have certain accents, or they are meant to have a certain dialect. Like, say, somehow characters from Osaka get dubbed as if they have a southern drawl.
See, as long as it stays consistent in the English, I don't mind that. Like, I loved Osaka back in Azumanga Daioh. She was my favorite character. But yeah, that can be hard. I think, actually, though, as far as the honorifics go, I don't think they sound bad in English, so I think if you actually do just do a return of the editor's note for some shows, just to, like, quickly catch everyone up on what each of those honorifics actually mean.
With how exposed people have been to honorifics over the course of 20 years, I don't even know if you need to anymore.
I would still do it because I think sometimes it's easier for some of us who are online involved with stuff as much as we are can kind of forget how a lot of other people might not be in as much in on the know as we are, or our circles. So I'd still keep the editor's note in because there are going to be people who are going to be like, what the fuck are they saying this for? And having those notes in isn't exactly going to take away from us.
It's one of those things where there's the balancing act of how much from the source material do you try and carry over. Imagine if all of the special attacks in a shonen battle manga had to be dubbed in English. With some of them you could probably get away with it. With others, a little bit less so.
Because I think if you're going to start translating them into English, you almost have to do all of them. Otherwise, it starts sounding weird. So I think you kind of got to make a call. All right, do I translate all of them into English, or do I leave all of those with the Japanese name, or just as long as it stays consistent?
And of course, this applies even more so with the ones that are in English. And One Piece is certainly one example of that.
I have not watched much of the One Piece in English at all.
Which I can understand not wanting to watch it in English because of the damage that 4Kids did with those early episodes.
Look, I saw some of the Funimation clips in English, like just the clips. I'm like, no. Some of the
Is
characters sound fine, some of them no.
is it a case of no because so many of them aren't even trying to hide the same voice that they used in DBZ?
I don't think so, because I don't think was Luffy in DBZ, because I did not like the English voice actor for Luffy.
I'd have to double check. I know it was I I can't hear Usopp's dub voice without hearing Krillin. I'll put it that way.
I didn't listen to Usopp in any of the clips.
I know I've been picking on 4Kids a lot, and rightfully so, but one thing I will not dispute is that they had a very good dub cast in their lineup, and since one of them has decided to endorse one of my friend's projects, I can't be too hard on the guy. I remember when there was a big hubbub about the dub of Prison School referencing quote Gamergate creep show, and I had said that this was a unforced error. Now, a lot of people are like, "Well, you're just saying that because you're a part of that crew." It's like, no, that's not why I'm saying it. I'm saying it because you're gonna date the work.
That was a weird time. Like, following that, even people who were like hated Gamergate at the time were like, what are you doing? Why are you shoving that into this? It obviously does not belong here.
Like I said, you're going to date the work as I mentioned, because in a few years when all of those movements have not necessarily faded into memory, but are not at the forefront, then somebody who is detached from the current year conversation are not going to know what the hell they're doing.
I'm not entirely against the idea putting stuff in a work that's going to date it, if that's kind of what you're going for. But this isn't their work they're putting this into. They're dating other people's work because of this, and I think that kind of makes it worse.
Oh, definitely.
It's like, I'm fine with a person putting any kind of like political or social stuff they want into their own stuff. But in the case with this localizations, we're kind of seeing people do that with other people's work. That pisses me off.
And it's understandable that it would.
It gets especially annoying because, again, not everyone's online following all of this stuff like we are. There's going to be a lot of people that'll like look at some of this stuff and not realize how much of the current political opinion is from the localizers and not from the people who created these works. And it's frustrating because it's like, how do you let these people know what's going on? Like, obviously, there's people like me and you who'll talk about it. There's going to be others talking about it. Well, I'm glad it's getting more traction these days than it used to, because
I think we're going to be seeing a bit of a vicious cycle going about. It's going to get more traction, and thus the people who are the... Let's not forget, the sole reason that this thing kind of exploded was the announcement that Ancient Magus Bride was getting a new volume that was going to get a simultaneous release that was AI assisted. That's what caused a bunch of folk to start autistically screeching. Then when people saw that screeching, even though it's... A lot of people were saying, oh, they're just using AI to replace translators. No, what Kadokawa was doing was using AI and then having their own in-house crew clean it up. It is still going through human hands. It's just this tool is assisting on the matter.
And it's making it easier for them to do it in-house rather than have to source it out over here.
Zan and I had talked about it, and a couple of years ago, it was announced that Kadokawa was going in-house for translating their light novels under their banner. A lot of people didn't think too much of it because light novels are still more niche than full-on anime and even full-on manga. We had the mindset of this is going to create a potential issue, because if this gets more traction, then Kadokawa might look at a company like Funimation and go, why are we paying you if we can do it ourselves?
Like, I know it came up on one of our streams before as well, but I think what we hadn't really thought of at the time was AI getting involved, because that wasn't really something that was being talked about. Now that it is, I suspect a lot of Western localization studios are going to be in for a lot of hurt in the coming years.
Especially since in the last month we've seen more and more articles exposing the problem, or there's been a lot more mask off moments, as it were. Because of that, you're going to have more people paying attention to this kind of thing.
I think the moment they start realizing how easy it might be to cut out the Western localization studios, the quicker they start to realize how beneficial that's going to be for them, I think it's going to just start hitting in waves at a time soon. Like, I don't think it's just going to be like a domino of like, okay, this place starts doing it, now they're doing it here, now here. Because it's Katakawa doing it now, right? The moment
But
it works out for them, it's going to be a wave.
but
That's my theory.
it is important to keep in mind Katakawa was a big damn deal.
It's one of those things we here in the West, unless we went out of our way to look into it, would probably never realize. Because their name isn't really like front and center on a lot of things. Like, I don't really like want to sit here and say a lot of people are going to be losing jobs over this, because I think we both agree there are some good localizers.
There
Like,
are,
we brought up
but have you seen what's been going on in tech? It's been a mass culling because a lot of the gravy train has run dry. The reason why people have less sympathy if those folks are going to lose their jobs is because they created their own problem.
some of the ones who aren't the problem are going to get caught up. It's just kind of an inevitable nature of the beast. Like, I hope that guy who did a great job with your boy Kong Ming's gonna keep a job. Bring that guy
I
in
think
because he clearly cares.
A few days ago, I was on Adventure Slang Productions podcast, and this kind of thing got brought up. I had said that the people who have actual skill are not going to have anything to worry about. Like the people who have skill and have talent and actually care about their work are going to be fine. Much in the same way that when it comes to the art situation, the people who actually care about their art are going to be and can negotiate deals are going to be fine.
I believe the majority of, but inevitably someone's gonna get caught that you probably think shouldn't have gotten.
Oh, that's happened. That's happened
Yeah.
plenty of times already. Up and hell, it happened just 48 hours ago with Schwalb's current project, Shadow of the Weird Wizard, which is basically a more family-friendly version of Shadow of the Demon Lord. But even though he clearly states he's not using AI art on the Kickstarter, some dumbasses still accused him of One Piece on the page being AI art. I've warned about that kind of thing, about how people are going to look for that clout by witch hunting, and in doing so are going to nab people who at most are stylized but aren't using AI.
Now, it's one of those things, like, I'm gonna say, like, I'm gonna feel bad for the people who are getting caught in this kind of shit that shouldn't, but at the same time, like, it's going to happen. Like, there's not really a way forward in which everybody gets to walk out happy.
There was an option to that, but it involves some of the people who are caught in it to actually have humility.
I think as we go forward, we're gonna see again a lot more of the Japanese studios handling a lot of it in house, but there's still gonna be a bit of localization done, to make sure the language flows nicely, it's understandable, and all of that.
I do think as the because the boulder's already started to roll downhill. It's already started to get to the point where social media users in Japan have been taking notice.
I think that was one of the big tipping points, is when Japan started realizing they're fucking with this work that much.
It's important to keep in mind that this is not just a work, this is culture.
I think from what I've read, like, a lot of them are also kind of noticing it's not like the Western fan base that wants this either. Which is a good thing, I think. Everyone, no matter country, language, can all come together and just hate the same group. There's something somewhat heartwarming about that.
How everybody's able to come together to laugh at Cowboys fans.
I don't even like football. I have fun laughing at Cowboys fans.
To be fair, they kind of do it to themselves, and in the same vein, these people do it to themselves.
And see, I'm just waiting for, like, the game studios to start picking up on this as well now.
Keep in mind that the boulder is slow moving.
At this point, it's just a wait and see game on that front.
And I am always patient.
That's it. I think we pretty much covered all the major and many minor points. Is there anything else you want to talk about on the subject?
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, people. Make sure to eat your vegetables, or I will haunt your dice and curse them. Stay frosty.